But the strengthening process is the really important part. That is what actually builds back up strength and resilience into this lumbar spine, the area that you've injured at the root cause of the sciatica. So if you're not doing that, what you will often find, Stephen and others in this category, is that you get some raging symptoms, you do less, and then you start to feel like you're kind of okay again. You can put up with what's left in terms of symptoms. And then you start trying to do more again and you re-injure yourself because you haven't built any strength whatsoever. So then you do less still, and then you settle, and then things settle down to, again, another baseline. You're not aggravation free, you're not out of pain, but things are kind of good enough for you to carry on. And then you try, and what happens is you just get this step change and your life just shrinks down, and to the point where you get to a point where you can't do any less and you have another aggravation. Because in this scenario, we're not actually doing any strengthening work, anything to objectively build strength and resilience. So what happens is we injure. The way in which our skeleton is strong is through utilization. A lot of us, unfortunately, once we finish school and we are forced to do activity, we just do nothing. Nothing concerted anyway, nothing to build strength and resilience. So what's happening is we are just gradually, or maybe more rapidly, losing competence in our body, losing the structural integrity that our body has, strength, stability, etc. Therefore, becoming more and more vulnerable to injuries. That is not necessarily a foregone conclusion that has to happen, certainly not at that rate. If you look at, for example, some of the powerlifters and those kind of things, like, they're not young guys that are actually significantly stronger than they were when they're in their 20s and they're in their 30s and so on. Right? Something worth bearing in mind. Ronnie Coleman, for example, I think, as a bodybuilder, was lifting huge amounts of weight and was at his physical peak much later on than you might admit. Now, he's a good example of maybe some other issues, but that's by the by. The point is that so many of us are just on a downward trajectory in terms of the strength, stability, and integrity of our body. So we injure our L5-S1, like, for example, in this case, maybe with Stephen, and then we do very, very little. So the only stimulation that was keeping the rest of the spine, muscles, the hips, the knees in good nick was daily life. And we're not doing that. So it deconditions and deconditions and deconditions. And now, next thing we know, this goes on for long enough, we've deconditioned the whole body. It's just not very fit. Our heart, our lungs, everything else has just degraded over time. We couldn't possibly run for the bus even if our back wasn't a problem. We couldn't run there because we've got no cardiovascular endurance. Our heart and lung health is terribly poor.